Okay guys, here is lecture number 2 in my versions of the Canvas online lecture series that we're kind of doing here. And this one involves the European exploration. Why and who was kind of responsible for these opening up of these trade routes throughout Africa and Asia as we kind of talk about them for the rest of this semester. So basically, one of the things we're going to kind of talk about to start off first is the fact that why do the Europeans want to explore other parts of the world? We've discussed in class on a couple of different occasions that people like Mansa Musa of the West African kingdoms started to draw attention to themselves through the fact that there were a lot of riches in these particular areas of the world that really kind of interested the Europeans as a whole. But the problem was that the Europeans did not have a whole lot of information about the interior of Africa. They only knew the basics from what they knew around the Mediterranean Sea, what they knew from Egypt, and what descriptions they got from the Muslim traders that brought a lot of these riches back to Europe. So there was some major reasons as to why the Europeans wanted to explore these other parts of the world. Obviously, the first one that we see here is to expand their knowledge of the world. They really only knew about the area around the Mediterranean Sea at this point in time. So, I mean, with that, I mean, it was very much an area that they knew just pretty much basically around here on the map. And that was, for the most part, what they knew of Africa. And they wanted to kind of expand that knowledge, and like I said before, they knew that there was wealth out there to expand into. Number 2, they wanted to find a faster sea route to Asia. Once again, China, India had some major items that they wanted to trade for. Okay, the Muslims controlled much of Asia. That they would have to travel through land routes, and at this point in time, the majority of Europe was Christian, and they really didn't want to have to deal with the Muslims as they traveled from Europe to Asia. So therefore, they didn't want to pay taxes, so they wanted to try to find a sea route around Africa and into India, and then eventually into China. So it was very much a way to try to find a faster sea route to Asia and avoid those land-controlled Muslim areas. Once again, like I said before, this is pretty much an easy one. Find gold, precious metals, and other raw materials. The West African kingdoms drew them in by the trade of the gold and salt trade that was taking place there, as well as ivory. You know, that kind of drew them in, and the Europeans wanted to kind of be a part of that. So therefore, the gold, precious stones, and raw materials was very important to the people of Europe. Also, as I talked about before, the Muslims controlled a lot of these areas. So the Christians, or the Europeans, wanted to expand their major religion, that would be Christianity, to areas like in Africa and Central Africa where there was more tribal religions taking place in those particular areas at that point in time. So therefore, they wanted to be able to expand Christianity. And then a last one, and this is going to be a big one for this semester, was to establish colonies and then eventually into empires. This is going to be a huge trend, because the more land that they controlled, the more resources they controlled, the more money they made, the more people they controlled, eventually is going to help to establish for a lot of these European countries more power. And that is key to this whole thing. This is going to give them power, and that's what they were striving for, to have more power over the rest of the world. So who was the first to explore Africa? Well, it was this little itty-bitty country right here of Portugal, right off the coast of Spain. They had a prince there, Prince Henry the Navigator, which we'll get into here in just a few minutes. But the Portuguese explorers were kind of, like I said before, sent out because the land routes were very costly, very dangerous, and it was controlled by Muslim traders. And once again, Christians and Muslims did not get along very well in this time period, so therefore they wanted to avoid those Muslim taxes and dealing with the Muslims as they traded throughout much of these particular areas of the world. So they wanted to find they needed a safer, faster route to Asia. And the guy that kind of led the charge of this was a young prince in Portugal by the name of Prince Henry the Navigator. He was the one that kind of financed all the trips. He sent the explorations to West Africa in order to break the Muslim control of the trade with India, with China, and in areas of Africa like the West African kingdoms, which we've already talked about. So that was the big main goal, and he's the guy that basically is the one responsible for establishing these new explorations to find new, faster ways to get into Africa and into Asia. Probably the first of one of the major ones, the major explorers that we're going to discuss, is Bartolomeu Dias, and he is responsible for sailing around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa. If you guys don't know what the Cape of Good Hope is the southern tip of Africa, where currently the country of South Africa is located at. And he sailed around the Cape of Good Hope, but was forced to turn back because he ran out of supplies, or he was running low on supplies, and he was afraid that his crew was going to overthrow him, maybe throw him and kill him. So therefore, he turned back to sail back to Portugal. But he was the very first person to actually make it by boat all the way around the tip of the Cape of Good Hope, and kind of established a route for our next explorer, which was Vasco de Gama, who actually did sail around the Cape of Good Hope and made his way all the way to India. He was much better supplied, so therefore he was able to establish the first water route from Europe to India, which was a very important stop for them because of all the spices and the access eventually into China as well too. But I mean, it was a huge trip for these particular explorers. There's one other explorer that we're going to kind of talk about, and he sailed the opposite way of the other two, and this is Ferdinand Magellan. He was the first explorer to attempt to sail around the world. He headed towards the Americas, sailed around South America, and eventually his ship made it back to Europe because he died somewhere, I believe, in the Philippines on this trip. So he did not make the full journey himself, but his boat did, and then therefore he was his crew and his ideals were kind of responsible for the exploration to fully circumnavigate the globe. And if you guys don't know what circumnavigate is, it's the fact that they made the process where they made the trip all the way around the globe. So with that said, that's kind of our water explorers. We're going to talk a little bit later, and we've talked a little bit about it in class, about the actual exploration of the interior of Africa by Stanley or Livingston and Stanley. So remember that. You have the readings over that, as well as the video we watched over that. So we will talk a little bit more about that later. But this is the basic reasons as to why the Europeans explored, as well as some of the first explorers of the world. So if you guys have any questions, please make sure you ask and answer the question below, so that I know that you guys are taking part in this lecture series. All right, talk to you guys later.